Okay, we welcome Mr. Nigel Bedford back for a second helping. Nigel was from the IDBF Para Athletes Commission, and we're asking all the complexities and intricacies of para athletes and impairments. How do you fit the multitude of variations of impairments into a dragon boat competition? How is it done?
Yeah, this has been the absolute fundamental building block of our framework rules, is the categorization of the impairments. And what the Commission set out to do was to try and identify how particular impairments would impact your ability to deliver power to your dragon boat paddle and move the boat forward. We recognise a range of classifications of impairments. Unlike other sports, we say any physical impairment, any psychological impairment, any neurological, sensory, developmental, intellectual impairment, any impairment at all, we care about, and we will score that impairment. The way we have done it is to ascribe a maximum number of points that the total crew can hold between them.
Right.
So individuals are given points, but the crew must not have more than a set number. And that depends on whether it's a standard boat, small boat, and so on. But every paddler is given a classification, given a scoring for his or her impairment, given any adjustments for age and gender, and those scores are all then summed, and the entire team must not exceed a set amount. That's the principle of it. And our starting point, and we arbitrarily chose 20 points as the starting point, was a young man in his 20s who was unimpaired.
Wow.
That's the starting point. And we gave that person 20 points. And then any impairment that that individual had, any age difference or any gender difference, would reduce the score progressively down depending on how severe that impairment was.
Right. So let's unpick that a little bit, because when I read it first time, I had to read it twice myself to get a handle on it. But the way I understand it, like, you've got your notional 20-year-old Premier team paddler, fully fit, fully functioning, no impairments to speak of. But they may have a very minor impairment that doesn't drop them below 16 points. So when I look at the cumulative scores you can aggregate, if you've got somebody who's scoring over 16 on your scale, then they wouldn't be deemed impaired. Is that right?
No, that's not. No.
Oh,
that's
right, okay.
That is a misunderstanding.
Right.
So what we're saying is that we recognise that a team arriving at a championships may have somebody who is severely impaired.
Right.
And to offset that in the boat, we will allow people who have very minor impairments. But the total score mustn't exceed a certain amount.
Okay.
So let me take an absolute worst case example that we've come up with so far is a tetraplegic. They can contribute virtually nothing to the forward speed of the boat.
Right.
But they want to be in the race.
Right.
Okay. Why shouldn't we allow them to be in the boat? No reason at all. Let them participate. They may be able to contribute something, but they're not contributing as much as perhaps somebody, let's say, who's visually impaired. Now, visually impaired people, realistically, can paddle almost as fast as totally unimpaired people.
And we've had this conversation that one of the drills that we do, if somebody's out of time or out of phase, we get them to close their eyes. Right. So actually, absolutely, yeah.
So what we tried to do in our scoring system was to allow for that and say, well, the club coach can choose a mix of paddlers with a mix of impairments.
Right.
So as long as the entire team score doesn't exceed the maximum that's allowed for that particular race,
right,
he can have lots of minor impairments and a couple of people who are severely impaired, or he can have an entire crew that's somewhere in the middle. It really doesn't matter. He or she can play tunes on their team composition or availability of paddlers to put a team on the water.
But I'm sure as time goes on, I mean, it would be absolutely impossible. You'd have to sort of set the boat sailing and then build it as you're going along, because there will be other people who, I don't doubt, where people will do something and you think, actually, that wasn't quite in the spirit of what our plans were. But that'll have to come out in the wash, won't it, in terms of what people do and how they put their teams together. It's actually more advanced and more open and inclusive than I thought it would be, because you could have somebody who is basically contributing little to the paddling, but massively to the spirit and the morale of the team.
Yeah,
and that is brilliant. That is actually brilliant in concept, design, and execution as well. I mean, that's fantastic, actually. The race categories, it's bringing on another subject there. The race categories. So you've got your PD 1, 2, and 3, and this would actually further complicate that, because you've got, well, tell me, you've got teams that are full ParaDragon, partial ParaDragon, and specific ParaDragon. Please unpick that for me.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go in reverse. Let's start with PD3. Right. PD3 is a category that at the moment we don't envisage will appear at IDBF events.
Right.
It's a race category for crews who all have the same type of impairment. So, for example, we could have visually impaired teams from all over the world paddling against each other, and they would be a PD3 category because they'd all have the same impairment.
Right.
The chances of that happening at the moment are pretty slim. PD2, which is a mixed boat, and it's mixed in terms of mix of impaired paddlers and unimpaired paddlers, is the category that has been trialled with great success already at the European Club Crew Championships last year in Seville. And the idea here is that clubs, or perhaps even nations, may yet themselves not have the opportunity to provide a full boatload of impaired paddlers. But we've still got impaired paddlers who want to paddle. They want to be involved in our sport, and we want them to be involved in our sport. So we came up with this concept of PD2, where approximately half the crew could be unimpaired paddlers. That has real benefit for us as officials, because it provides that extra level of safety, because you've got fully unimpaired paddlers in the boat.
Right.
But it also means, from a club perspective, that they've got greater opportunities for participation, and a national perspective, they've got greater opportunities, because if you've only got to find perhaps 10 impaired paddlers,
absolutely, yeah,
you can still race in a standard boat with 10 unimpaired paddlers.
Right.
And to me, what we noticed in Seville, and it was an unintended consequence, was what that meant for the unimpaired paddlers. They actually got a huge amount out of paddling with impaired people.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
So the emotional attachment that they formed with their unimpaired paddlers was huge. And they were proud to be paddling in the same boat as ParaDragons. So the PD2 category satisfies a range gives a range of benefits. It allows more teams to participate, provides a greater level of safety, but at the end of the day, it makes our sport more inclusive. It recognises that there are people with impairments, but it gives them the opportunity to race with elite athletes if they wished.
I recognise this because I had the privilege over the last few years to coach Pink Champagne, and even though I can't race with Pink Champagne, obviously, that gives me a huge amount of pride, and I've got to say, probably more pride, in fact, definitely more pride than coaching the British national team. It's something that's heartstring stuff, isn't it? And it really means something. And when you see what people go through, so I get that 100%, and that is brilliant. Now, this is going to be a big question. How do you make all this fair?
Oh, sorry, we missed out one, Tim. We missed out PD1. Just to move up a level.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, sorry.
PD1, that's where all of the paddlers in the crew, are impaired. We will allow for the drummer and the helm to be impaired, but their scores don't count.
Right.
So as far as the paddlers, PD1 is the whole crew is impaired.
Right. And there's, I mean, in the scoring system, in the document, which is on the IDBF website, then there's it shows you or walks you through, even though I didn't get it first time, the scoring system and how it works. And I think we may have to return to that and unpick that a little bit more, because it takes a few, I'm sure it took you a long time to write it, because it takes a long time to try and unpick it. But returning to that question there, how do you make it fair? Because having worked on the Paralympics, you know, some adaptations, for example, to some of the athletes are considered enhancements. So how do you start to try and make this fair with 22 people in a dragon boat?
Yeah, that's a really pertinent question. In fact, my commission 2 weeks ago, we had one of our regular meetings, and this exact subject came up. And we have just proposed to the International Dragon Boat Federation a rule change about adaptations and prosthetics,
yeah,
which essentially aligns IDBF with the International Paralympic Committee's view that the adaptation or the equipment used by the para-athlete cannot enhance the ability of the athlete to perform. It just allows the athlete.
It facilitates, because I was thinking, just from my time in the Paralympics, I'm thinking Oscar Pistorius. I know he fell from grace, but he was with his blades. I mean, the way you assess, some of the best ways to assess leg speed, or that's one of the best ways to assess speed on the track. Of course, one of the highest leg speeds ever recorded of all time was Oscar Pistorius. Didn't have lower legs, he had blades. So, and I'm just thinking, when you go through boat marshalling, people going with all this equipment, how do you decipher what is an enhancement?
Yeah. Well, as I say, we've proposed a rule change to the IDBF,
yeah,
which will apply across all competitions, not just ParaDragons, but all competitions, about how you can use equipment if you have the need to do so.
Yeah.
And one of the drivers for us was recognizing that countries across the globe are at different stages of development as countries and have different amounts of national wealth.
Yes.
And there are individuals in some countries who may be missing a leg, for example, who would have a wooden stump to replace their missing leg. And countries like ours, where some of our people who've lost limbs are in the fortunate position of having effectively computer-controlled prosthetics.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what we decided as in the commission and what we're proposing to the IDBF, that latter example would be banned.
Right.
To make it a level playing field for the people from the less developed countries who don't have access to that sort of technology or to the engineering that would result in that sort of prosthetic or adaptation being developed.
Okay. Now, I appreciate last few questions here. The rule book. I think you mentioned in a previous correspondence, evolution, maybe more revolution than evolution, but certainly it's developing, and by a comprehensive document, albeit version 5 is going to be evolving as time goes on, and other situations will be thrown up, and you respond to those and adapt appropriately. But what does the future hold? Now, it's looking pretty bright to me, but give me a nutshell, or a snapshot of where you see it going. Great success in Seville, but how are you building upon that given the return from Corona?
The coronavirus has obviously impacted the whole sport, not just ParaDragons. It's impacted the whole sport, and it will do so for longer than it has impacted other sports, just by the nature of our sport. And we are trying to use this time that's available to us to spread the word more widely around the federation members, to try and encourage them to develop their own teams and their own protocols and so on, so that the World Nations Championships, hopefully next year in Hong Kong, and the Club Crew World Championships the following year in Saratoga, will both have ParaDragon categories, which will be well attended.
Yeah.
Our job is not, as a commission, our job is not to actually form clubs, go around and coach clubs. Our contribution right now is to provide the framework for those clubs and those countries to participate in a competition against other similar impaired crews. That's what we're trying to do right now. But to do so, we need to get the word out, and we need conversations like this you and I are having now, Tim, are invaluable in just spreading the word. If there's one person listening to our conversation today who's sitting at home with an impairment thinking, there's nothing I can do in life, you know, I've lost my leg in a motorcycle accident, what hope have I got of doing anything? They get one thing out of this: find out a dragon boat club, join it, because virtually every dragon boat club in this country and many around the world would welcome you as a member, full stop.
Right.
But what we're trying to do as a commission is then to give you an avenue to race.
Okay.
In a competition on the world stage against other people with impairments. And I think that's a fantastic way of promoting our sport as the most inclusive sport probably around the world.
I think it's the vision. I think it's brilliant. I think it's totally brilliant, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to talk to you about it, because if this program and others facilitate, assist that process, and like you say, motivate one person to take the first step, then it's been a success. Okay, 15 minutes. That's your lot, my friend. Thank you very much. You have been a star of the highest order in magnitude. Hang on there, we'll carry on talking, but thank you for the time being, Mr. Nigel Bedford. Cheers.